The blood on Katherine Harris's hands wasn't hers, and that fact alone made Zachary Turner question every warning he'd received about the woman standing in the middle of White River's Main Street at high noon, wild-eyed and trembling under the unforgiving Wyoming sun. "She'll destroy you, son," his father had written in that final letter before pneumonia claimed him last winter. "Known her family for years. That girl's got tragedy woven into her bones. Every man who's loved her has ended up broken or buried." Zachary had folded that letter away with all the others, never expecting to lay eyes on Katherine Harris himself. But here she was, 22 years old according to the whispers rippling through the gathered crowd, standing over a man twice her size who wasn't moving. The knife at her feet glinted in the harsh Wyoming light. "He tried to rob me," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden silence that had fallen over White River's dusty street. Her dress, once probably a respectable blue calico, was torn at the shoulder. "I defended myself." Zachary watched as Marshall Dawson pushed through the crowd, his weathered face unreadable. At 24, Zachary had seen his share of trouble during his years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana, but something about this moment made his heart hammer against his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with the violence. "That's Tom Brennan," someone muttered behind Zachary. "Mean drunk, but he's the mayor's cousin." Katherine's eyes swept across the crowd, defiant and terrified all at once. They were the color of honey, Zachary noted, and there was something fierce in them that made every warning he'd ever received about her seem simultaneously true and utterly irrelevant. "Miss Harris," Marshall Dawson said slowly, crouching beside the fallen man. "Tom's still breathing. Looks like you got him good on the head with something." "My reticule," Katherine said, holding up a small bag that clearly had something heavy inside. "It has my father's watch in it. He grabbed me, tried to pull me into the alley. I wasn't going to let that happen." The marshal stood, dusting off his knees. Witnesses. Silence. Zachary looked around at the faces in the crowd and saw what he'd seen too many times before, good people deciding that getting involved wasn't worth the trouble. He thought about his father's letter about the warnings. He thought about the easy thing to do, which was to walk away and pretend he'd never seen those honey-colored eyes or the proud set of that woman's shoulders despite her fear. "I saw it," Zachary heard himself say, stepping forward. "I was coming out of the general store." Tom Brennan grabbed her, tried to drag her into the alley between the bank and the saloon. She fought back. It was self-defense, clear as day. Every face in the crowd turned toward him. Zachary had been in White River for exactly 2 weeks, hired on as foreman at the Double R Ranch, 3 miles outside town. He didn't know these people, and they didn't know him, which meant his word carried exactly as much weight as a stranger's word could carry in a small Wyoming town in 1882. Marshall Dawson studied him for a long moment. "You're Turner, right? New foreman out at the Reeves place?" "Yes, sir." "And you're willing to swear to what you saw?" Zachary felt the weight of his father's warnings, felt the careful life he'd been building threatening to complicate itself in ways he couldn't predict. Then he looked at Katherine Harris again and saw her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I'll swear to it," he said. The marshal nodded slowly. "All right then, Miss Harris, you're free to go. Tom, when he wakes up, will be answering some questions about his behavior." He raised his voice. "Rest of you, show's over. Get about your business." The crowd dispersed with the reluctant shuffle of people disappointed at being denied drama. Zachary found himself standing in the middle of the street with Katherine Harris, who was looking at him like she couldn't quite figure out if he was real. "You didn't see anything," she said quietly. "No," Zachary admitted, "but I've seen enough men like Tom Brennan to know what happened without having to witness it. You just lied to a marshal for a complete stranger. I told him what needed to be told to see justice done. There's a difference." Katherine studied him, and Zachary felt that gaze like a physical thing. Up close, he could see the freckles dusting her nose, the way her dark hair had come loose from its pins, the rapid pulse at her throat that betrayed how frightened she still was despite her brave front. "Thank you," she said finally. "Though you should know that helping me was probably the worst decision you could have made in this town. I'm not exactly popular, I've heard. Then you're either very brave or very stupid." Zachary found himself smiling despite the tension still crackling in the air. "My mother always said I was a bit of both, Zachary Turner." He held out his hand. She looked at it for a moment before taking it. Her hand was smaller than his, work roughened and still trembling slightly. "Katherine Harris, but I suppose you already knew that. I've heard your name mentioned once or twice since I arrived in town. None of it good, I'm sure. I try not to put too much stock in gossip." Katherine released his hand and bent to retrieve her reticule, wincing as she straightened. Zachary noticed the way she favored her left side and frowned. "Are you hurt? Just bruised? Tom got me against the wall pretty hard before I managed to get my bag up." She smoothed down her torn dress, a futile gesture. "I should go home before anyone decides to change their story about what happened here. I'll walk with you." "That really isn't necessary." "Maybe not," Zachary said, "but I'm going to do it anyway." She looked like she wanted to argue, but something in his expression must have convinced her it would be pointless. "Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you when people start whispering about you too." They walked together through White River's dusty streets, past the church and the schoolhouse, past houses that grew more scattered the further they went from town center. Zachary noticed how people watched them from windows and doorways, noticed the way Katherine kept her chin up despite the attention. "So tell me," he said after they'd walked in silence for a few minutes, "what exactly did you do to earn such a reputation?" "The warnings I heard made it sound like you were some kind of dangerous femme fatale." Katherine laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I didn't do anything except be born to the wrong family. My father was a gambler and a drunk. He ran up debts all over town before he died 3 years ago, and I've been working to pay them off ever since. People don't like being reminded of money they're owed. That doesn't explain why multiple people told me to stay away from you specifically." She was quiet for a moment, her jaw tight. "My father wasn't the only man in my life who brought trouble. There was a man I was engaged to when I was 19, Samuel Pritchard. He was the sheriff's son, well-respected, came from a good family. Everyone thought I'd finally found my way out of my father's shadow. What happened? He was stealing from the town treasury. Blamed it on my father at first, said he'd discovered evidence of his theft. But I found the real evidence, the proof that Samuel was the thief. When I turned it over to the marshal, Samuel tried to skip town. Ended up getting shot by his own father when he pulled a gun rather than face arrest." Zachary absorbed this, understanding dawning. "And people blamed you." "Of course they did. In their eyes, I'd gotten another good man killed. Never mind that Samuel was a thief and a coward. Never mind that he tried to frame my dead father for his own crimes. All they saw was Katherine Harris destroying another life." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "That's what you need to understand about me, Zachary Turner. I don't mean to bring trouble. I never have. But it seems to find me anyway, and the people around me tend to get caught in the crossfire." "Is that why you tried to scare me off just now? Talking about how helping you was a mistake?" "I'm trying to be honest. You seem like a decent man. You don't deserve to get tangled up in my mess of a life." Zachary looked at her standing there in the afternoon sun. This woman who'd been handed nothing but hard choices and harsh judgments, and felt something shift in his chest. His father's warnings echoed in his mind, but they felt distant now, drowned out by the steady certainty growing inside him. "What if I don't care about that?" he said. "Then you're definitely more stupid than brave. Or maybe I just think you deserve to have someone on your side for once." Catherine's expression softened, just for a moment, before she shook her head and started walking again. "You don't even know me, so let me get to know you. Why? What possible reason could you have for wanting to get mixed up with me and my problems?" Zachary caught up to her in 2 long strides. "Because when I saw you standing in that street today, defending yourself against a man who tried to hurt you, all I could think was that you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. And because when you looked at the crowd, daring any of them to call you a liar, I saw exactly the kind of strength I've spent my whole life admiring." She stopped walking again, and when she looked at him this time, there was something vulnerable in her expression that made Zachary's breath catch. "You're going to regret this. Let me worry about that." They stood there in the middle of the dirt road, the afternoon heat pressing down on them, and Zachary wondered if this was the moment his father had tried to warn him about. The moment when common sense should prevail, when he should tip his hat politely and walk away from the beautiful, troubled woman who'd already been marked by tragedy. Instead, he said, "Where's home? I meant it when I said I was walking you there." Catherine's house, when they reached it, was a small cabin at the edge of town, its paint faded and porch sagging slightly. But the windows were clean, the small garden out front was tended with care, and there were cheerful yellow curtains visible through the glass. "It's not much," Katherine said, and Zachary heard the defensiveness in her voice. "It's honest," he replied. "That's worth more than size or shine." She climbed the porch steps and turned to face him. "Thank you for walking me home, and for what you did back there with the marshal. I won't forget it. I'd like to see you again," Zachary said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. "That's not a good idea. Seems like we have different definitions of good ideas." "Zachary." She trailed off, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. "People will talk. Your reputation will suffer just from being seen with me. I've survived worse than gossip. Your employer might not like you associating with me. John Reeves strikes me as a man who judges people on their character, not on town gossip. If I'm wrong about that, then maybe I shouldn't be working for him anyway." Katherine bit her lip, and Zachary noticed for the first time how full her mouth was, how the simple gesture made him want to step closer. He held his ground, waiting. "There's a church social on Saturday," she said finally. "I usually don't go because my presence makes people uncomfortable. But if you're serious about this, about getting to know me, that would be a very public way to declare your intentions. What time should I pick you up?" "You're really going to do this?" "I really am." She studied him for another long moment, and Zachary let her look, let her see whatever she needed to see to trust that he meant what he said. Finally, she nodded. 4 o'clock. The social starts at 5, but it's a bit of a walk to the church." "I'll be here at 4. Zachary walked back to town with his heart pounding and his mind already racing ahead to Saturday. He picked up the supplies he'd originally come to town for, ignoring the curious looks and whispered comments that followed him through the general store. By the time he made it back to the Double R Ranch, the sun was starting to sink toward the western horizon, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. John Reeves was waiting for him on the ranch house porch, a cup of coffee in his weathered hands. At 55, John had spent his entire life in Wyoming, building his ranch from nothing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. He was fair but demanding, and Zachary had liked him immediately when they'd met 2 weeks ago. "Heard you had some excitement in town today," John said as Zachary dismounted. "News travels fast." Always does in small towns. You stood up for Katherine Harris. Zachary met his employer's gaze steadily. I did. That girl's got a complicated history, so I've been told, multiple times. John took a sip of his coffee, his expression thoughtful. Her father owed me money when he died, $300 from a poker game. Catherine's been paying it back, $5 a month, regular as clockwork for 3 years. Never missed a payment, never asked for an extension or forgiveness. This surprised Zachary. She didn't mention that. Wouldn't probably. She's got pride, that one, stubborn as hell too. John set down his cup. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that whatever you might hear about Katherine Harris, she's got integrity. More than most people I've met, if I'm being honest. But she's also had a hard life, and people in this town have long memories for all the wrong reasons. Are you telling me to stay away from her? I'm telling you that if you're going to pursue this, and I can see in your eyes that you are, then you'd better be serious about it. That girl doesn't need another person who's going to let her down. Zachary nodded slowly. I am serious. Then you've got my support. And for what it's worth, you'll have my wife's too. Martha's always felt bad about how this town treats Katherine. She'll be pleased to know someone decent is finally paying attention to her. Over the next few days, Zachary threw himself into his work at the ranch, but his thoughts kept drifting to Saturday and to honey-colored eyes and a voice that tried to sound tough, but couldn't quite hide its vulnerability. He asked careful questions about Katherine around the ranch, and what he learned only reinforced his conviction that he'd made the right choice in standing up for her. She worked as a seamstress, he discovered, and as a laundress, and sometimes as a cook for trail crews passing through. She sent money east to an orphanage every month, had for years, even though she barely had enough for herself. She'd taken in a stray dog last winter and nursed it back to health. She read voraciously, borrowing books from anyone who'd lend them. The picture that emerged was of a woman who'd been dealt a terrible hand and was doing her level best to play it with honor and grace. Zachary found himself growing more intrigued with each new detail. Saturday arrived clear and warm, typical for a Wyoming June. Zachary took extra care getting ready, putting on his best shirt and spending probably too long making sure his hair was properly combed. Martha Reeves caught him checking his reflection in the window and laughed. She must be something special to have you this worked up, Martha said. She was a comfortable-looking woman in her early 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Zachary appreciated. I think she might be, Zachary admitted. Catherine's a good girl. Always thought so, even when others were quick to judge. You treat her right, you hear me? Yes, madam. Zachary borrowed the ranch's wagon for the trip into town, wanting Katherine to ride in comfort rather than on horseback. He arrived at her cabin precisely at 4 o'clock, his stomach doing nervous flips that he hadn't felt since he was 16 and calling on his first girl back in Texas. Katherine opened the door before he could knock, and Zachary felt his breath catch. She wore a dress of pale green cotton that brought out the gold in her eyes, her dark hair pinned up in a style that was both elegant and simple. She'd clearly put effort into her appearance, and the result was stunning. You came, she said, and he heard the relief in her voice. Did you think I wouldn't? I thought you might have reconsidered, had second thoughts about being seen with me. Zachary held out his hand. No second thoughts. You look beautiful, Katherine. She blushed, the color rising in her cheeks in a way that made him want to say something else that would bring that color back. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. The ride to the church was filled with conversation that flowed easier than Zachary had expected. Katherine asked about his work at the ranch, and he found himself telling her about his childhood in Texas, about the cattle drives he'd worked, about his dreams of eventually having his own place. In turn, she told him about the books she was reading, about her small garden, about the dress she was working on for a rancher's wife 20 miles north. "It's for her daughter's wedding," Katherine explained. "She specifically asked for me because she'd seen a dress I'd made for someone else. It's the biggest commission I've ever gotten. That must feel good." "It does. It feels like maybe, slowly, I'm building something of my own, a reputation based on my work rather than my past." They arrived at the church to find the social already in full swing. Tables had been set up in the yard, covered with food brought by the town's families. Children ran and played, their laughter carrying on the evening air. A group of men had brought instruments and were playing music near the church steps. The moment Zachary helped Katherine down from the wagon, he felt the attention shift in their direction. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Heads turned. The weight of dozens of judgmental stares settled over them like a heavy blanket. Katherine's hand tightened on his arm. "We can leave," she said quietly. "This was a mistake." "We're not leaving," Zachary said firmly. "We came to the social, and we're going to enjoy the social." He kept his hand over hers on his arm and walked with her into the gathered crowd with his head high and his stride confident. He nodded politely to people who stared, smiled at those who whispered, and refused to acknowledge the discomfort their presence was clearly causing. Martha Reeves was the first to approach them, her husband right behind her. "Katherine, dear, you look absolutely lovely. And Zachary, I'm so pleased you brought her. Come, let me introduce you both to some people." What followed was one of the more uncomfortable hours of Zachary's life, but also one that filled him with a growing sense of righteous anger. People were polite to his face, because he was John Reeves' foreman, and alienating him would mean alienating one of the most powerful ranchers in the area. But the way they looked at Katherine, the way some women pulled their skirts aside as if her mere presence might contaminate them, made his blood boil. Katherine handled it with a grace that awed him. She smiled, made polite conversation, and never once let on that she noticed the slights being directed her way. But Zachary noticed the tension in her shoulders, saw the way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. They were standing near the food tables when Mayor Preston approached with his wife. The mayor was a barrel-chested man with mutton chops and an expression of perpetual self-importance. "Turner," he said, nodding curtly. Then his gaze moved to Katherine and his face hardened. "Miss Harris, I'm surprised to see you here. It's a church social, Mayor Preston." "Last I checked, I was still a member of this community." "Yes, well, I heard about the incident with my cousin Tom. He tells a very different story from the one you gave the marshal." Zachary felt Katherine tense beside him. "Is Tom claiming he didn't try to assault me?" "He says you propositioned him, and when he refused, you attacked him." The mayor's wife nodded vigorously beside him, her expression pinched and disapproving. "That's a lie," Zachary said before Katherine could respond. "I witnessed what happened, and I told the marshal the truth." Tom Brennan tried to drag Miss Harris into an alley. She defended herself. "Or perhaps you're a young man swayed by a pretty face into believing a convenient story," Mrs. Preston said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Katherine has a history of manipulating men." "That's enough," Martha Reeves said sharply, stepping forward. "You will not slander this girl in front of me, Helen. Katherine has done nothing wrong except be born to unfortunate circumstances and have the courage to speak truth to power. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps you should examine why." "Well," Mrs. Preston drew herself up, affronted. "I never thought I'd see you defending someone like her, Martha." "Someone like her? You mean someone honest, someone who works hard and pays her debts. Someone who has more integrity in her little finger than half this town combined." Martha's voice had risen, and people were starting to turn and watch. This town should be ashamed of how it's treated Katherine. Her father's sins were not hers. Samuel Pritchard's crimes were not hers. The only thing she's guilty of is surviving circumstances that would have broken weaker people. The silence that followed was absolute. Mayor Preston's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "You're entitled to your opinion, Mrs. Reeves, no matter how misguided it might be. Come, Helen." The Prestons stalked off, and the gathered crowd slowly resumed their conversations, though the atmosphere remained awkward. Martha patted Katherine's hand. "Don't you let them make you feel small, dear. You hold your head up." "Thank you, Mrs. Reeves," Katherine said, and Zachary heard the emotion thick in her voice. "You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did. It was long past time someone said it." The rest of the social passed in a blur. Some people made a point of speaking kindly to Katherine after Martha's speech, while others gave them an even wider berth. Zachary stayed close to Katherine's side, making sure she knew without words that he wasn't going anywhere. As the sun began to set and people started packing up to head home, Zachary and Katherine walked to the wagon. She was quiet, her face thoughtful in the fading light. "You don't have to say it," Zachary said as he helped her up. "I know what you're thinking. Do you? You're thinking that I should have listened to the warnings. That being with you is going to complicate my life in ways I'm not prepared for. That tonight proved everything you tried to tell me about how this town sees you." Katherine turned to look at him, her expression serious. "Aren't those valid concerns? Maybe. But here's what I'm thinking." Zachary climbed up beside her and took the reins, but didn't immediately start the horses moving. "I'm thinking that tonight I saw a woman face down the judgment of an entire town with more courage than most men I've known could muster. I'm thinking that Martha Reeves was absolutely right when she said you have more integrity than half this town combined. And I'm thinking that whatever complications might come from being with you are worth it if it means I get to know you better." "Zachary, I'm not done." He turned to face her fully. "I'm also thinking that my father once wrote me a letter warning me about you. Told me you'd only bring heartache. But my father, for all his good qualities, was a man who played life safe. He never took risks, never stepped outside what was comfortable and expected. And you know what? He died with regrets, told me so on his deathbed. Said he wished he'd been braver, wished he'd followed his heart more often instead of his head. And what is your heart telling you? That you're worth the risk, that whatever comes, I want to face it with you." Katherine's eyes shimmered with unshed tears in the twilight. "You barely know me. Then give me the chance to know you better. Not just at church socials or in front of the whole town, but really know you. Your thoughts, your dreams, your fears. Give me that chance, Katherine." She was quiet for a long moment, and Zachary held his breath, waiting. Finally, she nodded. "All right. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. Promise me that if this gets to be too much, if the complications start outweighing whatever you see in me, you'll tell me. I don't want you to wake up one day and resent me for dragging you into my mess of a life." Zachary reached out and took her hand. "I promise, but I don't think that day is going to come. You're an optimist. I'm a man who knows what he wants." The smile she gave him then was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, unguarded and bright. It transformed her face, made her look younger and free of the burden she usually carried. Zachary felt something in his chest expand, felt the certainty settling deeper. He drove Katherine home slowly, neither of them in a hurry to end the evening. They talked about small things, comfortable things, and Zachary felt the last of her walls beginning to come down. By the time they reached her cabin, the moon had risen full and bright, painting everything in silver light. "Thank you for tonight," Katherine said as Zachary walked her to her door. "For standing by me, for not running when things got uncomfortable. It's been a long time since anyone did that. You don't have to thank me for doing what's right. Maybe not, but I want to anyway." She hesitated, then rose up on her toes and pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Zachary." She was inside before he could respond, leaving him standing on her porch with his heart racing and his cheek burning where her lips had touched. He walked back to the wagon in a daze, already counting the hours until he could see her again. The following weeks fell into a pattern that felt as natural as breathing. Zachary found reasons to come into town every few days, always ending up at Katherine's cabin. Sometimes he'd bring her things from the ranch, fresh eggs, vegetables from Martha's garden, a book he thought she might like. Sometimes they'd sit on her porch and talk for hours. Sometimes they'd walk together through the countryside surrounding White River, discovering secret places where the world seemed to consist only of the two of them. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Zachary discovered that Katherine had a sharp wit and a love of terrible puns that made him groan and laugh in equal measure. He learned that she was terrified of thunderstorms, a fear born from the night her father died when lightning struck a tree near their old house. He found out that she'd taught herself to sew by unpicking old garments and studying how they were constructed, that she dreamed of one day opening her own dress shop, that she'd never been more than 50 miles from White River in her entire life. Katherine, in turn, learned that Zachary's confident exterior hid deep insecurities about living up to his father's legacy. She discovered his love for horses, the way he could gentle even the wildest Mustang with patience and understanding. She learned that he woke before dawn every morning because he loved watching the sun rise, that he had a beautiful singing voice he was shy about using, that he carried a small sketchbook where he drew the landscape during quiet moments. "You're an artist," she said one afternoon as they sat by the river north of town, watching the water flow past. She was looking through his sketchbook with an expression of wonder. "Not really, just something I do to relax. These are beautiful, Zachary. Look at this one of the ranch at sunset." "You've captured the light perfectly." He felt himself flush with pleasure at her praise. "I've been wanting to draw you, but I didn't know how to ask, seemed too forward." "Draw me now," she said impulsively. "Right now? Why not? The light is beautiful and I want to see how you see me." So Zachary sketched while Katherine sat on the riverbank, the afternoon sun gilding her hair and painting warm light across her face. He tried to capture the exact curve of her smile, the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in the set of her shoulders. When he finally showed her the result, her breath caught. "Is this really how you see me?" "Yes. I look almost beautiful." "There's no almost about it," Zachary said firmly. "You are beautiful, Katherine, inside and out." She looked at him for a long moment, and Zachary saw something shift in her expression, saw the last of her careful walls crumbling. "I'm falling in love with you," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to, tried not to, but I am." His heart felt like it might burst. "Good. Because I've been in love with you for weeks now. Even knowing what being with me might cost you, especially knowing that." He took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You're worth any cost, Katherine. I wish you could see yourself the way I see you." "I'm starting to," she admitted. "When I'm with you, I feel like maybe I'm not just the sum of my past mistakes and my father's sins, like maybe I could be someone new. You've always been someone special. The town just couldn't see it." They sat together on the riverbank as the sun sank lower, talking about the future in a way that assumed they'd be facing it together. Zachary told her about his dream of owning his own ranch someday, and Katherine shared her hope of opening a dress shop. They wove those dreams together, imagining a life where both could come true. "We could build on land outside town," Zachary said. "Close enough to bring your dresses to customers, far enough to have the space for cattle and horses. And we'd have a big porch for watching sunsets, and a library for all your books, and a studio for your sketches. It was a beautiful dream, fragile as spun glass, and both of them knew better than to assume it would come easy. But for those few hours by the river, they let themselves believe. The trouble started 3 weeks after the church social. Zachary was in town picking up supplies when he overheard a conversation in the general store that made his blood run cold. "Preston's still furious about what happened at the social," a voice said. Zachary recognized it as belonging to Deputy Miller. "Says Martha Reeves humiliated his wife in front of the whole town." "Can't say Helen didn't deserve it," another voice replied. "She was being cruel to that Harris girl." "Maybe so, but Preston's looking for payback. Been asking questions about Katherine, digging into her past. Says he's going to prove she's unfit to live in this town." "What's he think he's going to find?" "Everyone already knows about her father and Samuel Pritchard." "Don't know, but he's been sending telegrams east, talking to people who knew her father before he came to Wyoming. Whatever he's looking for, he's determined to find it." Zachary finished his purchases quickly and headed straight to Katherine's cabin. He found her in her small workroom, bent over a partially completed dress, her face intent with concentration. She looked up when he knocked, and her smile of welcome faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" He told her what he'd overheard. Katherine listened without interrupting, but he watched the color drain from her face. "There's something," she said quietly when he finished. "Something I haven't told you about my past." Zachary's stomach dropped, but he kept his voice steady. "Tell me now." Katherine set down her sewing and moved to the window, looking out at her small garden. "My father didn't just gamble and drink. Before we came to Wyoming when I was 17, he got involved in a scheme back in Missouri. He was helping a man named Vincent Shaw run a rigged card game, cheating wealthy travelers passing through town. I didn't know about it until the law got involved." She turned to face him, and Zachary saw shame in her eyes. "My father blamed me. Told the authorities I was the one luring the men to the game, using my looks to distract them while the cheating happened. It wasn't true, but there were men willing to testify that I'd been present, that I'd spoken to them. I was never charged with anything because there wasn't real evidence, but the rumor followed us. It's why we came to Wyoming, to escape the scandal. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I was ashamed. Because even though I didn't do what he accused me of, I was there. I saw what was happening and I didn't stop it. I was young and scared and under my father's control, but that doesn't absolve me." Zachary crossed to her and took her hands. "You were 17 years old and trying to survive with a father who was willing to throw you to the wolves to save himself. That's not something to be ashamed of. Mayor Preston won't see it that way. If he finds out about Missouri, he'll twist it, make it sound like I've been running cons my whole life. Then we'll deal with it together. We'll tell the truth before he can spread lies. Zachary, this could ruin you. If you stay associated with me after this comes out, people will assume you're either a fool or complicit in whatever they decide I'm guilty of. I don't care what people assume. You should care. Your reputation matters, your job matters. John Reeves has been good to you, but even his goodwill might not survive a scandal like this." Zachary cupped her face in his hands, making her meet his eyes. "Listen to me. I love you. Not in spite of your past, not even setting aside your past, but understanding it as part of what made you into the incredible woman standing in front of me. Whatever comes, we face it together. You understand. You might lose everything. The only thing I'd lose that matters is you, and that's only going to happen if you push me away." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve you. You deserve so much more than what this town has given you. Let me be the one who finally gives you what you deserve." She kissed him then, properly kissed him for the first time, and Zachary felt the rightness of it down to his bones. This was what his father's letter had warned him about, this moment of choosing between the safe path and the one that led to her. He'd chosen, and he'd do it again every day for the rest of his life if that's what it took. They spent the rest of the afternoon making plans. Zachary would talk to John Reeves, get ahead of whatever Preston might be planning. Katherine would gather documentation from Missouri, letters from people who knew the truth about what had happened. They'd present the facts honestly and trust that there were enough decent people in White River to see through Preston's vindictiveness. It was a fragile plan, dependent on the goodwill of a town that had shown Katherine precious little goodwill in the past. But it was all they had. John Reeves listened to Zachary's story without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. They were sitting in his study, a room lined with books and filled with the comfortable clutter of a man who actually used his space for living rather than impressing visitors. "Preston's a vindictive man," John said when Zachary finished. "Always has been. Doesn't take kindly to being crossed, and what Martha said at that social crossed him publicly. I know, but Katherine didn't do anything wrong, not in Missouri and not here. She was a victim of her father's manipulations. I believe you. Question is, will the rest of the town believe it when Preston starts spreading his version of events? That's what I need to know from you, sir. Will you stand with us when this comes out? Your word carries weight in this community. If you vouch for Katherine, others might listen." John was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he sighed. "You're putting me in a difficult position, son. I like you, and I believe you're sincere about this girl. But taking a public stand in support of her is going to make enemies I've spent years avoiding." Zachary felt his heart sink, but he nodded. "I understand. I'm not finished." John leaned forward. "What I was going to say is that it's a difficult position, but it's also the right thing to do. I'm getting old, Zachary. When I look back on my life, I don't want to regret staying silent when I should have spoken up. Martha's already read me the riot act about how this town treats Katherine. Says I'm a coward for not standing up for what's right. And what do you think? I think my wife is usually right about these things." John smiled slightly. "You have my support. When Preston makes his move, I'll make sure people know I stand behind Katherine Harris, and I'll make it clear that anyone who has a problem with her has a problem with me." The relief that washed over Zachary was profound. "Thank you, sir. I can't tell you what this means. Just promise me you'll take care of that girl. She's been through enough. I promise." The storm broke 2 days later. Mayor Preston called a town meeting at the church, ostensibly to discuss the upcoming territorial elections, but really to reveal what he discovered about Katherine's past. Zachary and Katherine arrived together, flanked by John and Martha Reeves in a show of solidarity that didn't go unnoticed. The church was packed, every pew filled with curious townspeople eager for drama. Preston stood at the front, his chest puffed out with self-importance. When he saw Katherine enter, his smile was predatory. "How kind of Miss Harris to join us," he said. "Saves me the trouble of seeking her out afterward." "Get on with it, Preston," John Reeves called out. "If you've got something to say, say it." Preston's smile widened. "Very well. I've recently come into possession of some interesting information about Miss Harris's time in Missouri before she came to Wyoming. It seems her father was involved in running rigged card games, cheating honest men out of their money. And Miss Harris herself was complicit, using her feminine wiles to lure victims to the table. The murmur that ran through the crowd was exactly what Preston had been hoping for. Zachary felt Katherine tense beside him and squeezed her hand. "That's not the whole story," Zachary said, standing up. Katherine was 17 years old and under her father's control. She wasn't part of his scheme. That's not what my sources in Missouri tell me, Preston said smoothly. I have sworn statements from 3 men who remember Miss Harris specifically approaching them, engaging them in conversation, and leading them to the game where they were subsequently cheated. Did these men happen to mention that they were embarrassed at being caught by a rigged game? Katherine asked, standing up beside Zachary. Her voice was steady despite the tremor Zachary could feel running through her. Or that blaming a 17-year-old girl was easier than admitting they'd been foolish enough to fall for an obvious con. What I know is that you have a documented history of being involved in criminal activity. Combined with your more recent history here in White River, it paints a clear picture of a woman who brings nothing but trouble to those around her. That's enough, Martha Reeves said, rising to her feet. I've heard just about all I can stomach of your self-righteous posturing, Harold Preston. You want to talk about criminal activity? Let's talk about how you've been skimming money from the town's road improvement fund for the past 3 years. The silence that fell was absolute. Preston's face went from red to white and back to red again. That's slander, he sputtered. No, it's fact. My husband serves on the town council, or have you forgotten? We've been documenting the discrepancies for months, waiting for the right time to bring it up. Well, this seems like the perfect time. Martha's voice was hard as iron. You want to destroy a young woman's reputation to cover for the fact that she embarrassed your wife. Fine, but don't expect to do it without consequences. John Reeves stood, pulling papers from his jacket. These are the financial records Martha mentioned. They clearly show money being diverted from the road fund into accounts controlled by the mayor. We've been waiting to have enough evidence to make charges stick. Looks like we've got plenty now. The crowd erupted into chaos. Preston tried to deny it, but the evidence was damning and everyone could see his guilt written on his face. Marshall Dawson stood up, his expression grim. Mayor Preston, I'm going to need you to come with me. We've got some questions that need answering. As Preston was led out protesting his innocence, the crowd slowly dispersed. People looked at Katherine differently now, some with curiosity, others with sympathy, a few with hostility that wouldn't be changed by any amount of evidence. But the tenor had shifted. She was no longer the sole focus of scandal. Outside the church, Katherine turned to Martha and John with tears streaming down her face. You didn't have to do that. You could have used that information any time. You waited until you could use it to help me. We waited until it would do the most good, Martha said, pulling her into a hug. That man needed to be stopped and you needed to be defended. Seemed like good timing to me. I don't know how to thank you. Live well, be happy. That's all the thanks we need. The aftermath of the town meeting rippled through White River for weeks. Mayor Preston resigned in disgrace and left town under cover of darkness to avoid prosecution. The deputy mayor took over his duties, and one of his first acts was to formally apologize to Katherine on behalf of the town. It wasn't enough to erase years of mistreatment, but it was a start. Zachary's standing in the community, rather than being damaged by his association with Katherine, actually improved. People respected that he'd stood by her, that he'd been willing to risk his reputation for what he believed was right. The ranch hands at the Double R started treating him with a new level of respect, and John Reeves gave him increased responsibilities and a raise in pay. But the best change was in Katherine herself. Slowly, carefully, she began to let go of the armor she'd worn for so long. She smiled more freely, laughed more often, and started accepting invitations to social gatherings instead of automatically declining. The town, for its part, seemed determined to make amends for its past treatment of her. Women who'd previously snubbed her started commissioning dresses. Families invited her to dinners. It wasn't universal. There were still those who couldn't let go of their prejudices, but it was progress. Through it all, Zachary and Katherine grew closer. Their courtship became official, acknowledged, celebrated even. They were seen together everywhere, at church on Sundays, at social gatherings, taking long walks through the countryside. Zachary met the few friends Katherine had managed to maintain through her difficult years, and they welcomed him warmly. Katherine became friends with several of the ranch hands' wives, finding a community of women who judged her on her character rather than her past. 6 months after that first day in the street, Zachary took Katherine back to the riverbank where they'd first spoken of their dreams. Autumn had painted the landscape in shades of gold and crimson, and the air held the crisp promise of coming winter. "I have something to ask you," Zachary said as they sat on the bank, watching the water flow past. Katherine turned to him with a smile. "That sounds ominous. I hope it's not." He took her hand, his heart pounding. "When I first came to White River, I thought I was just looking for steady work and a place to settle. I never expected to find you. I never expected to fall so completely in love that the thought of a single day without you feels impossible." "Zachary, let me finish. I know we've only known each other 6 months. I know there are people who'll say it's too fast, that we should wait longer. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about wanting to spend the rest of my days with you." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "Katherine Harris, will you marry me?" She stared at the ring, then at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Are you sure? Really sure? Because once we do this, you're tied to me and everything that comes with me for the rest of your life. I'm counting on it. I come with debt and a damaged reputation, and a past that some people will never let me forget. You come with strength and integrity and a heart that I want to spend my lifetime learning to deserve. Now, are you going to answer my question or just keep listing reasons why I shouldn't want to marry you?" Katherine laughed through her tears. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Though I still think you're crazy for wanting me. Then I'm crazy. I can live with that." He slipped the ring onto her finger and she stared at it like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Then she was kissing him, and he was holding her close, and the future they'd imagined by this river was suddenly, miraculously real. They were married 6 weeks later in the same church where Preston had tried to destroy Katherine's reputation. It was a small ceremony, attended mostly by the Reeves family and ranch hands, along with the few friends Katherine had in town. But it was perfect, and when Zachary said his vows, looking into honey-colored eyes that shone with happy tears, he felt like the luckiest man alive. Martha Reeves cried through the whole ceremony. John smiled and shook Zachary's hand afterward with pride in his eyes. "You're a good man, son. Take care of her. Always," Zachary promised. They spent their wedding night in a hotel in the larger town of Rock Springs, 30 miles from White River. It was Katherine's first time leaving the immediate area, and she pressed her face to the train window like a child, taking in everything with wide-eyed wonder. "This is just the beginning," Zachary told her. "We'll travel more, see more of the world. I want to show you everything." "I just want to be with you," Katherine said. "Everywhere else is just scenery." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, both of them nervous and eager in equal measure. Afterward, lying in bed with Katherine's head on his chest and her hand over his heart, Zachary felt a contentment he'd never known before. "I love you," Katherine whispered into the darkness. "I never thought I'd get to be this happy. Get used to it. I plan on making you this happy every single day for the rest of our lives." "That's a bold promise. I'm a bold man." She laughed and tilted her head up to kiss him. "Yes, you are. You took a risk on me when everyone told you not to. That's either bold or crazy. I prefer bold. Me too." They returned to White River to find that John Reeves had given them a wedding gift that took Zachary's breath away. 200 acres of prime grazing land adjoining the Double R, along with enough lumber to start building a house and a small herd of cattle to get them started. "We can't accept this," Zachary said, overwhelmed. "It's too much." "You can and you will," John said firmly. "I don't have children of my own. You two are as close to family as Martha and I have. This land would just sit unused otherwise. Build something on it, make it your own." So they did. Zachary continued working as foreman for the Double R while using every spare moment to build their house. Katherine continued her sewing, but now she was saving money not to pay off her father's debts, but to open her own shop. Other ranch hands helped with the construction, and slowly, a home began to take shape. It was a simple house by most standards, but to Zachary and Katherine it was perfect. A large front porch for watching sunsets. A separate room Katherine could use as a workroom for her sewing. A bedroom with windows facing east so they could watch the sunrise from bed. A kitchen with a big table where they could gather with friends and, hopefully someday, children. They moved in on a snowy December day, carrying their few possessions across the threshold together. That night, they made love in front of the fireplace, christening their new home with their joy and their commitment to building a life together. The first year of marriage brought challenges. Money was tight despite John's generosity and their combined incomes. The cattle got sick in late winter, and they lost nearly a third of the herd. A late spring frost destroyed Katherine's garden. But through it all, they had each other, and that made every hardship bearable. Katherine's dress shop opened in the spring of their second year of marriage, a small storefront in White River that she'd saved for and planned meticulously. The opening was attended by most of the town, and orders flooded in immediately. Katherine worked long hours, her skill and artistry finally being recognized and rewarded. Zachary worried she was overdoing it, but she was so happy that he couldn't bring himself to ask her to slow down. "This is mine," she told him one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sun set over their land. "The shop, this house, our life together, it's all mine in a way nothing ever has been before. My father couldn't take it. The town's prejudice can't diminish it. It's real and it's solid and it's ours." "I understand," Zachary said, pulling her close. "Though I hope you know you never have to prove your worth to me. You're enough exactly as you are, I know, but I think I need to prove it to myself. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Their third year brought a joy they'd been hoping for. Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news came in early summer, and Zachary whooped so loud the horses in the nearby pasture startled and ran. He picked Katherine up and spun her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "We're having a baby," he said, setting her down carefully like she was suddenly made of glass. "We're going to be parents." "We are," Katherine said, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "Are you ready for this? With you, I'm ready for anything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Katherine continued working in the shop through her second trimester, though Martha and the other ranch wives insisted she slow down as her due date approached. Zachary fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement and occasional annoyance. "I'm pregnant, not fragile," she told him one evening when he insisted she sit down instead of helping with dinner preparations. "I know, but you're carrying precious cargo. Humor me. You're impossible. You love me anyway. God help me, I do." Their son was born on a cold February morning in 1886, after a labor that terrified Zachary and exhausted Katherine. But the moment he heard that first cry, saw the tiny, red-faced baby that the doctor placed in his arms, Zachary felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect," he breathed, carrying the baby to Katherine's bedside. "You're perfect. "Thank you." Katherine, pale and tired but radiant, smiled up at him. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed names for months but hadn't been able to agree. Looking at his son's face, Zachary suddenly knew. "James, after my father. He would have loved to meet him." "James Turner," Katherine said softly. "It's perfect." Fatherhood transformed Zachary in ways he hadn't expected. The fierceness of his love for this tiny human astounded him. He found himself working even harder, driven by the need to provide the best possible life for his family. The ranch prospered under his management, and John Reeves increasingly relied on his judgment. Katherine blossomed as a mother. Despite her initial fears that she wouldn't know how to care for a child, given her own difficult upbringing, she proved to be naturally nurturing and patient. She'd bring James to the dress shop with her, working with one hand while rocking his cradle with her foot. Customers cooed over him, and the shop became as much a social gathering place as a business. When James was 2 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. Their daughter, Emma, was born in the spring of 1888, a tiny thing with her mother's honey-colored eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. Zachary was, if possible, even more besotted with Emma than he'd been with James. "You're going to spoil her," Katherine warned, watching as he rocked their daughter to sleep for the third time that night. "That's my right as her father," Zachary said, not taking his eyes off Emma's peaceful face. "She's perfect, and she deserves to be spoiled. Both our children are going to be impossible if you keep this up. Then they'll fit right in with their parents." Life settled into a rhythm that felt almost too good to be true. The ranch continued to grow. Katherine's shop was successful beyond her wildest dreams. Their children thrived. The town of White River, which had once been so hostile to Katherine, now embraced her fully. She served on committees, hosted gatherings, and was consulted on every matter of local importance. Who would have thought? She said to Zachary one evening as they sat on their porch, watching James and Emma play in the yard, "That the girl everyone warned you about would end up this happy. I would have thought," Zachary said. "I saw your strength from the very beginning. Everyone else was just too blind to see it." "My knight in shining armor," Katherine teased. "Just a man who knew a good thing when he saw it and was smart enough not to let warnings and prejudice stand in his way." Katherine leaned against him, and they sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. James was 5 now, Emma 3, and both children were the center of their world. James had his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Emma had inherited Zachary's artistic eye and Katherine's fierce intelligence. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked softly. "Taking a chance on me. Your life could have been so much simpler if you'd listened to the warnings." Zachary turned to look at her, this woman who'd captured his heart on a dusty street 7 years ago and never let it go. "I don't believe in simple. Simple is boring. Simple doesn't challenge you to be better. What I believe in is worth. And you, Katherine Turner, are worth every risk I've ever taken and more. Even when I'm disagreeable and stubborn, especially then." She smiled and kissed him, a kiss that still made his heart race after all these years. "I love you, Zachary Turner. Thank you for being brave enough to see past the warnings to who I really was. Thank you for letting me in, for trusting me with your heart despite every reason you had to keep it locked away." They were interrupted by Emma toddling over, demanding to be picked up. Zachary lifted her into his lap, and James soon followed, climbing up between his parents. They sat together as a family, watching the last light fade from the sky, and Zachary felt the profound gratitude of a man who'd been given far more than he deserved. The years that followed brought the inevitable challenges of life. There were difficult seasons when the cattle market crashed and money grew tight. Katherine's mother, who'd left years before Katherine came to Wyoming, resurfaced briefly, hoping to exploit her daughter's success, and had to be firmly sent away. James broke his arm falling from a horse, giving Zachary and Katherine several terrifying hours before the doctor assured them he'd heal fine. Emma developed a fever one winter that had them sitting up with her for 3 nights straight, praying she'd pull through. But through all of it, they had each other. Zachary and Katherine had built something unshakable, a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine love, and shared determination to build a life worth living. They'd proven every warning wrong, every dire prediction false. When James was 10 and Emma 8, John Reeves passed away peacefully in his sleep. He left the Double R Ranch to Zachary, saying in his will that he couldn't imagine better hands for his life's work. It was a responsibility that weighed heavy on Zachary's shoulders, but also one that filled him with pride. He merged the Double R with their own land, creating one of the largest ranching operations in that part of Wyoming. Martha Reeves lived for another 5 years after her husband's death, long enough to see James start learning the ranching business, and Emma discover a talent for training horses. Long enough to sit on the porch with Katherine and reminisce about that church social where she'd first stood up for her, the moment that had changed everything. "I knew then that boy was going to marry you," Martha said one afternoon. "Saw it in the way he looked at you, like you were the only person in the world worth seeing." "He saved me," Katherine said simply. "Not from Tom Brennan that day in the street, though he did that too, but from the life I thought was all I'd ever deserve. He made me believe I could be more." "You were always more, dear. You just needed someone to see it." Martha passed away in the spring of 1898, and they buried her next to John on a hill overlooking the ranch. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming, a testament to the lives the Reeves had lived and the legacy they'd left behind. Time moved on. James grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's quick mind for business. Emma became one of the best horse trainers in the territory, with people bringing animals from miles around for her to work with. They both married well, James to the daughter of a neighboring rancher, Emma to a schoolteacher who'd come west looking for adventure. Zachary and Katherine became grandparents and discovered that loving grandchildren was somehow even more intense than loving their own children had been. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, much to their own children's amused exasperation. "You're creating monsters," James told them after Zachary bought his grandson a pony against explicit instructions not to. "That's what grandparents do," Zachary said, utterly unrepentant. "Ask your mother. I seem to remember spoiling you and your sister just as badly." "He did," Katherine confirmed. "It's a family tradition at this point." Through all of it, through decades of marriage and children and grandchildren, and the endless work of building and maintaining their life, Zachary and Katherine never lost the spark that had ignited that day in White River's dusty street. They still sat on their porch every evening, weather permitting, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. They still made each other laugh with terrible puns and inside jokes that had accumulated over the years. They still reached for each other in the night, finding comfort and passion in familiar embrace. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the town of White River threw them a celebration that seemed to involve half the territory. It was held in the church where they'd married, and the turnout was so large that people spilled out into the yard. Speeches were made praising Zachary's business acumen and Katherine's generosity, her dress shop having become almost secondary to her charitable works over the years. When it was Zachary's turn to speak, he stood with Katherine beside him and looked out at the sea of faces. 25 years ago, I received a letter from my father warning me about Katherine Harris. He said she'd only bring heartache, that getting involved with her was a mistake I'd regret. The crowd laughed, knowing the story, having heard versions of it over the years. Katherine squeezed his hand, smiling up at him with those honey-colored eyes that still made his heart race. My father was wrong, Zachary continued. Katherine never brought me heartache. She brought me joy, partnership, love beyond what I knew was possible. She gave me children and grandchildren, helped me build an empire from nothing, and stood beside me through every challenge and triumph. If being warned away from her and choosing her anyway was a mistake, then I hope I never make a right decision. The applause was thunderous. Katherine was crying, and Emma and James both looked misty-eyed. After the celebration, after all the guests had gone home, Zachary and Katherine returned to their house and sat on their porch as they'd done thousands of times before. 25 years, Katherine marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you lied to the marshal for me. Other times it feels like we've been together forever. Both are true, Zachary said. Every day with you feels new but also like coming home. You're getting philosophical in your old age. I'm 49. That's not old, says the man with gray at his temples. You love my gray hair. You told me so just last week. I love everything about you, Katherine said, growing serious. I never stop being grateful that you took that risk, that you saw me when no one else would. I never stop being grateful that you let me. That you trusted me when you had every reason not to trust anyone. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The land around them, their land, stretched out in every direction. In the house behind them, the echo of their children's laughter and their grandchildren's joy still seemed to resonate in the walls. It was a life built on a single moment of choice, when a cowboy decided that one woman was worth any risk, any cost. The years continued to pass. Zachary's hair turned fully silver, and Katherine developed laugh lines that crinkled around her eyes. Their bodies grew older, slower, but their love remained constant. They'd proven that defying warnings, choosing love over caution, following your heart instead of wisdom, could lead not to heartache but to heaven. When Zachary was 68 and Katherine 66, he woke one morning to find her watching him with an expression of profound tenderness. "Good morning," he said, reaching for her hand. "What's that look for?" "I was just thinking about that day in the street, when you stepped forward and told the marshal you'd witnessed what happened with Tom Brennan. That was a lifetime ago. It was yesterday. It was the beginning of everything." She squeezed his hand. "I want you to know something, Zachary. Even if I'd known everything that was going to happen, all the challenges and struggles, I'd still have stood in that street. I'd still have waited for you to lie for me. It wasn't a lie. It was the truth that mattered. I'd still have fallen in love with you, still have married you, still have built this life with you, because you were right that day by the river when you proposed. I've never been more certain of anything than I am about choosing to spend every day with you." Zachary pulled her close, feeling the familiar shape of her in his arms, the scent of her that hadn't changed in 44 years. "I was told you'd only bring heartache. Instead, you gave me heaven. Best wrong warning I ever received. And the best risk I ever took was trusting you." They lay together in the morning light, two people who defied every expectation and built something beautiful from the wreckage of a bad reputation and a town's prejudice. Their children were successful, their grandchildren thriving, their great-grandchildren just beginning to arrive. The ranch they'd built together stretched across thousands of acres. Katherine's charitable foundation provided assistance to women trying to escape difficult circumstances, helping them build new lives the way she'd been helped to build hers. But more than any material success, more than any legacy they'd leave behind, was the simple fact of their love. Constant, unwavering, tested by time and proven true. The cowboy who'd taken a risk had found his heaven, and the woman who'd been warned against had found her home. They lived many more years together, growing old with the grace of two people who'd chosen each other every single day. When Katherine passed away at 82, peaceful in her sleep with Zachary holding her hand, he mourned her with a grief that was profound but not bitter. How could he be bitter when he'd been given more than most men dreamed of? He lived another 3 years, staying active on the ranch until his final week. His children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren surrounded him at the end, and his last words were about Katherine, about how he'd be seeing her soon, about how he couldn't wait to sit with her on a porch in heaven and watch the eternal sunset. They buried him next to her on the hill where they'd buried John and Martha Reeves, overlooking the land they'd built together. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire state of Wyoming, a testament to the life he'd lived and the love he'd shared. Years later, their great-grandchildren would sit on the porch of the house Zachary and Katherine had built and listen to stories about the couple who defied every warning to find their happiness. About the cowboy who'd been told a woman would only bring heartache and had taken the risk anyway. About how he'd found not heartache but heaven, and about how their love had become the foundation on which generations of family had been built. The house still stood, carefully maintained and treasured. The porch where they'd sat for decades still provided the perfect view of the sunset. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light was just right, you could almost see two figures sitting there, watching the sun go down over their land, hands clasped and hearts forever intertwined. It was a love story for the ages, proof that choosing courage over caution, heart over head, could lead to something extraordinary. Proof that warnings meant to protect can sometimes prevent us from finding exactly what we need. Proof that heaven isn't always a place we go after we die, but sometimes something we build with our own hands and hearts while we live. Zachary Turner had been warned. He'd taken the risk anyway. And in doing so, he'd found his heaven in the honey-colored eyes of Katherine Harris, the woman who'd been waiting in that dusty street for someone brave enough to see her worth. Together, they'd built a legacy that would endure for generations, a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and the willingness to take a chance on someone the world had written off. Their story became legend in White River, Wyoming, passed down through the years as an example of what's possible when you choose love over fear. And every time someone in that town faced a choice between the safe path and the one that led to their heart's desire, they'd remember Zachary and Katherine, and they'd find the courage to take the risk. Because sometimes the best things in life come from ignoring the warnings and following your heart into the unknown. Sometimes the people we're told to avoid are exactly the people we need to find. And sometimes, just sometimes, taking a risk on love can lead you straight to heaven.